If you share the refined taste of a Renaissance gentleman, nothing may sweep you off your feet quite like a swept-hilt. Whether you'd like to paint the town red or guard it, this is quite an aesthetic choice. Depending on your leanings, you might call this a side sword or a cut and thrust sword, which is kind of the more universal, neutral term. Some might call a rapier, perhaps a military rapier, or even a swept-hilt broadsword. This reproduction right here, the Town Guard, is made by LK Chen, and I'm going to give you my impression of how well made it is, how well it performs, how it handles, etc. First off, obligatory disclaimer, this was sent to me for free to review. You may remember the Town Guard by Arms and Armor that I reviewed in 2018. That sword I don't have anymore. That would have been neat for side-by-side comparison, but I can still compare from memory. So the original it is based on, it's rather originals, plural, because it's a group of swords, generally made between around 1600 and 1610, commonly associated with the Town Guard in Munich, Germany. Now, the Swedish Army Museum, which has one of these, points out that it was for the Knights of Pappenheim, which, like Munich, is in Bavaria. And the Bavarian Army Museum has a number of these, with markings that suggest that they were for the cavalry militia. So perhaps Town Guard is a bit of a misnomer for this, or perhaps they were issued to Town Guards as well as cavalry troops. I can't verify that 100%, but either way, this was standard equipment issued in times of service. And there were a lot of these. For example, A612 at the Wallace Collection in the UK, which I got to see in person. I couldn't handle it, but it was interesting to get an up-close look at it. Another one, also from 1600, is at the Worcester Art Museum in the US, and there is one at the Swedish Army Museum, which I already mentioned, the Royal Armories, several in auctions, etc. There are quite a few of these. When comparing, it's clear that the LK Chen reproduction sticks closely to the shape. And the originals, of course, being handmade, there are always some tolerances. It's not like mass-produced where all the measurements are exactly the same. Although, I will say, when comparing the measurements that are actually available, they are remarkably close. So it's clear that an attempt was made to get them as uniform as possible. These were, as said, standard issue, and I would call them identical within the framework of handcrafted objects. These are all remarkably close. Even the originals, comparing one to the other, it's pretty much identical. And so are the reproductions. They're very, very close to one another. The blade looks like the originals as well. The profile taper seems very close. The shape of the tip. This one is slightly altered. We'll get to that a little bit later. And the blade geometry in terms of cross-section also looks just like that. If you look at the central ridge, it's pretty well defined, nice and crisp. And it's a flattened diamond cross-section with a distal taper, as you can see, and comparing that to the original at the Wallace Collection without having been able to measure, just eyeballing it, it looks very close to me. One thing to note, where the ricasso turns into the blade, the originals have a nice gradual transition, which eliminates stress risers. This reproduction has a corner there, and a pretty hard one. They rounded off the inside of the corner just slightly, so it's not a perfect 90-degree, but I'm guessing that stress fractures would still be more likely to happen there, whereas on the originals, pretty much impossible. The Arms and Armor Town Guard had two decorative lines on either side. It was nice, but obviously not a crucial design feature. The wire wrap is done quite nicely and again looks quite close to the originals. Nice and tight, hasn't loosened up, at least so far. Now the pommel is a little different. This one is a simple cylindrical pommel, but the originals were flattened cylinder or flattened barrel shape, as the Worcester Art Museum puts it. I don't know if there were examples of these with the simple, fully round cylindrical pommel. The ones I could find all have the flattened pommel. And you always see like a bit of a ridge on the side or a seam, which is quite nice. It adds a lot to it visually and also makes the pommel a little bit lighter. I asked about it, and the original that was used for reference from an auction does have that simple pommel shape. So fair enough. I wish it had the flattened pommel, but in this case it is accurate. All the originals that I could find pictures of were blued steel, which not only looks nice, it also helps prevent rust. Now, they did that in a different way. This is stainless steel, which is actually more corrosion resistant than even blued steel. But the blued steel looks really nice. Now, the Arms & Armor one that I used to have also didn't have that, but at least they offered the option. Like, you can have a version with a blued steel hilt. The pommel has a fairly high polish, looks shiny, it's almost a little bit chrome-like. And then the guard has this dull gray finish, which I don't normally mind. And in fact, on the Arms & Armor one, it was also a duller, grayer finish than the blade. But in this case, it doesn't look quite right. Like, first off, I don't particularly like that those two are different. And it makes it look a little, I don't know, cheap maybe? Is the way to put it. Apparently this is the old version, which was sandblasted. More current models are hand polished and look a lot better in my opinion. Keep in mind, depending on where you order from, you might get one from an older batch with that gray sandblasted finish. A little bit of a casting flaw here. So it's not perfect, but overall it's a little nicer than some welded guards that you see. So please, LK Chen, give us a blued steel version, or at least the option. That would be great. That would hide this strange color. It would make it so much more appealing, because that contrast between the blued hilt and the blade is fantastic, at least in my book. On the upside, it's not difficult to do a bluing of stainless steel yourself. There are products for that. So one thing that I do not like at all on this is the fact that the pommel is not peened. You can see there's no sign of the tang going through. It's not even the good kind of threaded. You know why? It must be glued as well. You can't unscrew it. What's the point of having a threaded pommel if you can't even end them rightly? Guys, come on. You gotta commit to that, or just do it peened, which, believe it or not, I prefer. It's just stronger. This hilt is cast stainless steel, and I remember what happened with the cold steel hunting sword. So just in case, I want to make sure that this won't just fall apart. I don't want any scratches or other damage on it, so I'm just going to use a synthetic trainer to bash it with. Some on the blade too. Yeah, I don't see any damage, nothing broke, and didn't loosen up either. The blade is made of GB60 Si2 MNA, which is roughly equivalent to 5160 spring steel. That's always a good choice for sword blades. And it is heat treated to a hardness of between 52 and 54 on the Rockwell C scale. Not only does it feel sharp, it's also an excellent grind. A single bevel, great edge geometry for cutting. Much sharper than the Arms & Armor version. The problem is, when I did that review, I had sharpened it and then I showed the cutting with the sharpened blade. I don't really like to do that anymore because it just skews your impression of what you're getting. Of course, anyone can resharpen or touch up the edge or do whatever, completely regrind the thing if they want to get something that cuts better. But I'm interested in giving you an impression of what it does out of the box. And in that regard, this is a lot better. Although it can be a little tricky to figure it out because you have to cut a lot lower on this than you think. Even looking at it and seeing how much broader it is at the base and then how narrow it gets, it's easy to underestimate just how much closer you have to be. Which, of course, when it comes to the design overall, is a bit of a drawback because you're limiting the reach severely. What I mean is the sweet spot is about here, which is a lot of blade beyond that is not that usable. You can still cut with it, of course. You can always perform a tip cut, but it's much more effective lower on the blade, at which point this is like messer reach. In fact, there are longer messers than that can cut higher up on the blade. It took me a few attempts to get good cuts out of it, but that's also largely because I started out with a wooden core, which is always a little bit more challenging, and some of those were kind of low quality tatami. When I tried silk tatami mats without a core, went right through, no problem, but some of the others with a core were challenging to get through. So I would rate the cutting performance as good. Not very good or excellent or anything, just good. The thrusting power, on the other hand, would make even Duke Nukem blush. I tested this on riveted mail, and at first it didn't go terribly far, although the finely tapered point definitely helped in slipping in between rings or straight through a single ring. But when I found out which kind of step was much more effective in driving the blade in, it was devastating. This is definitely a mail breaker. That, of course, also is a great test of the strength and durability of this blade and its stiffness as well. This is nice and rigid. It has a good amount of flex, but much less so than just about any narrow, long-bladed rapier I tested. So this was a realistic test, but also a hard one. And we also tested it on a leather helmet, and the cuts didn't really do much to it. Basically just scored the leather without getting all the way through, which is still a good test for the sword overall in terms of impact. And then the thrusts on it. That's what caused a problem. I'm pretty sure this is together with the mail tests, which were really the harder ones, realistic but hard tests. And that's when the tip bent. So I'm assuming that the mail tests weakened it and then the head gave it the rest, so to speak. In order to fix that, I took a file and ground off the bent part. I wanted to leave a stronger point. So I just left it a little bit wider than it was, not that much, but it is definitely stronger now. That's not something I would fault the blade for. In fact, looking at how thin and narrow it was, I'm surprised that it took this much to see a bend. And then it wasn't that severe. You could have still used it. But as I said, it's stronger now. So the blade is excellent. No problem at all, both in the cut, in the thrust especially, that's where it really shines, and strength and such overall. The handling I have no complaints about either. It's really easy to maneuver, especially tip control is excellent. As you can imagine, with so much mass in the hilt, the balance is very far back. It's almost at the topmost ring, so you can imagine that gives you plenty of agility. This weighs 30 grams more than the Arms and Armor version, so identical weight, really. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference, except this one actually feels slightly lighter to me. I think the point of balance is a little closer compared to the Arms and Armor one. Apparently, I forgot to measure that back in 2018. Handling characteristics, in general, chef's kiss. The scabbard is a pretty simple affair, does have a wooden core. It fits it well, not the tightest fit. This can quite easily come out. The glue has come undone here at the ends, so you can see where the leather is peeling off. That's likely due to the climate difference between China and Canada. Not really surprising, it's a little different. But overall, this is really more, in my opinion, more for storage. I mean, you could wear it, you could put a belt on it, but, you know, it's for such a fancy sword, as I said, it's a little bit plain. But either way, it's nice that it comes with one. It's included in the price. And the price is one of its strengths. It costs about a third of the Arms and Armor version, which is not a fair comparison whatsoever. Obviously, one being made in the US, the other in China, the difference in wage is quite substantial. So of course you can produce more cheaply over there. So you can't really compare the two directly on that front, but still for you as a customer, if you want a well-made sword and you get one that costs around 500 as opposed to 1500 or 1600, something like that, it's a consideration, of course. So what I like the most is the handling, the performance, especially in the thrust, and the price is certainly a pro. It is a nitpick, no doubt about it, but because it's so close already overall, it does irk me a little bit that it didn't go the extra step and give it a blued finish. The threaded pommel, I do not like that. Threaded and glued, I mean, it seems solid. I can't really complain. It hasn't loosened up as such, but what's that? A threaded pommel you cannot remove? Jokes aside, it's not really a big deal. I think what I would prefer in this case would be a nut construction, so you can easily disassemble it, because nut assembly is stronger than just a threaded pommel overall, and it can be easily tightened up whenever needed, and you can disassemble. It makes it less historically accurate, but so does this. Either way, pros and cons all tallied up, particularly at the price. Worth recommending? You bet your puffy pants it is. So, hope you found this review helpful. Thanks for watching. Check out the measurements and links in the description below as usual. And while you're already down there, in the description you'll also find a link to my Patreon if you want to join up and help support the channel. It's definitely appreciated. Thanks for watching and take care, folks.